Chapter 3: Key Life Decisions, the Right Life Partner, and the Ideal Job. Of all forms of caution, caution in love is perhaps the most fatal to true happiness. Bertrand Russell. Never continue in a job you don't enjoy. If you're happy in what you're doing, you'll like yourself. And if you like yourself, you'll have inner peace. And if you have that, along with physical health, you will have had more success than you could possibly have imagined. If I were to ask you to name your most frequent purpose of act, what would you answer? You probably did not say decision making, but if you did, you get a gold star. Decision making is something we do all the time, every day, and with tremendous consequences. Forget about René Descartes' I think, therefore I am. A more pointed and correct adage is, I decide, therefore I am. Life is an interminable sequence of decisions. Notes the choices we make have downstream effects, and few if any will be as consequential as our choice of job and our choice of spouse. These two choices are central to our happiness, because they are where we spend our lives, at work, and with our families. Accordingly, we'd better make the optimal decisions when it comes to these two sources of potential happiness, or potential misery. I wake up on most days feeling very happy for three key reasons. First, I am fortunate to have that disposition. Second, I get to wake up next to my wife. She makes me happy in countless ways. You cannot get up on the wrong side of the bed if the one sharing the bed with you makes you happy. Third, as I mentally go through my to-do checklist for the looming day, I am always gleeful and brimming with anticipatory excitement at the innumerable opportunities that lie ahead. I might be spending some time working on my next academic paper, writing a few hundred words on my next book, teaching a class filled with inquisitive and bright students, holding a chat with a fascinating guest on my show, The Sad Truth, having a consulting meeting with a client, or hearing a pitch from a company that wishes to make me a business proposition. Perhaps meeting with some of my graduate students, whose theses and dissertations I am supervising, or making one or more media appearances. These are some of the recurring tasks of my daily professional life, and they each provide me with a deep sense of purpose and meaning. A life devoid of purpose is an unhealthy life. I mean that literally. It turns out that people over 50 who possess life purpose have greater protection against all-cause mortality. And for most of us, our life's purpose is deeply wrapped up with our work. And Aristotle argued that to live a good life requires phronses, practical wisdom. At times, longitudinal scientific studies merely confirm that which your grandmother taught you, phronses. And if your grandmother ever told you that there was wealth in having friends, she was absolutely right. Deep and meaningful relationships offer a direct path to happiness. Psychiatrist George Vaillant, former director of the multi-generational Harvard study of adult development that has run for more than 8 decades, noted that, when the study began, nobody cared about empathy or attachment. But the key to healthy aging is relationships. He has also stated that warm, intimate relationships are the most important prologue to a good life. Psychiatrist Robert Waldinger, current director of the study, echoed Vaillant's conclusions. And when we gathered together everything we knew about them, about at age 50, it wasn't their middle-age cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old. It was how satisfied they were in their relationships. The people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. This insight was corroborated in a meta-analysis of 148 studies involving 849 people. The strength of one's social relationships yielded a 50% increase in survival rates. Warm relationships offer a protective benefit, and none is more important to your happiness than your relationship with your spouse. It might be yet another cliché uttered by your grandmother, but a successful marriage makes for a happy life. And one of the keys to a successful marriage is open, honest, friendly, respectful communication. My wife and I never go to bed mad at one another, and we are much more likely to praise or appreciate each other than to criticize each other. Psychologist John Gottman has spent many decades studying marital patterns that lead to divorce. Not surprisingly, he found that spouses who act contemptuous of each other or who are critical, defensive, or evasive in communicating with each other are much more likely to get divorced. Mate choice is a compensatory process. You can make up for your shortcomings. The One is a 2021 Netflix series based on the biological determinant premise that you can find your ideal marital match, namely, the one, by submitting your DNA to a central database where it can be matched with others. But in reality, this is not how life works, largely because mate selection is what we might call a multi-attribute compensatory choice. Let me explain. If a tall man is generally considered more desirable than a short man, How is it that millions of shorter men attract beautiful women as sexual partners? The answer is that mate choice is compensatory, meaning that we can compensate for a shortcoming, forgive the pun, by scoring highly on other desirable traits. A tall man who opens his mouth and signals to the world that he is dumber than occasional cortex. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a nearly impossible reality to achieve, might be less attractive to most women than a somewhat shorter man who is highly intelligent, charming, and socially dominant. How else do you think that I was able to marry my immeasurably lovely and beautiful wife? If you are unhappy with your romantic life, please realize that you can alter it. We have the power to improve our prospects in the mating market, and in doing so, increase our chances at happiness. For instance, a young unemployed man living in mom's basement playing video games is unlikely to find an orderly line of beautiful women wanting to marry him. But if he were to get a job, exhibit assertiveness and ambition, cut his greasy hair, wear attractive clothes, go to the gym regularly, and involve himself in active social circles, he would have a much better chance of finding an attractive mate. Similarly, a 500-pound woman who attends body positivity seminars and rails against the patriarchy is unlikely to find an orderly line of studly, high-status men waiting to court her. But if she were to get off the proverbial couch, lose those excess 350 pounds or more, adopt a sunnier disposition, and travel in social circles that don't hate men, she will certainly have a broader range of prospective suitors. And by the way, before my listener takes offense, I live my advice. I have lost a lot of weight myself. I consciously strive to be friendly and ambitious, and I have a very happy marriage. Beware of matchmakers. I returned to my home city of Montreal in 1994 to start my career as a young and single assistant professor with a newly minted PhD from Cornell University. Gleeful matchmakers abounded. After all, in some Jewish circles, it is a mitzvah, a divinely prescribed good deed, to play the role of a matchmaker. Not surprisingly, not all matchmaking efforts prove successful. In my case, perhaps the most memorable failed attempt occurred when a couple, who had been long-standing friends of my parents, dropped by while I was visiting. A male friend asked if I'd be interested in meeting some beautiful Lebanese Jewish and Syrian Jewish women from the New York, New Jersey area. I shrugged, gave him a tepid affirmative, and he summoned me closer for a more intimate conversation. He said, "This professor thing you are doing, is this something that you are going to stick with? Because these girls are very wealthy, you know. Their families are very wealthy." I mimicked his tone of confidentiality and replied, "You tell those girls that if they would be ashamed to marry a professor, and if their parents would be ashamed to have their daughters marry a professor, I'm unlikely to be interested in meeting them." Then I dismissed him with a hand gesture. Once the couple left and I was alone with my parents, how do you think they responded? The answer is, with exasperation. My mother, with my father's approval, admonished me. "Why do you have such a sharp, venomous tongue? Why must you answer in this manner?" Apparently, my parents were not angered by the disrespectful idiocy of their friend, but rather were annoyed by my sarcastic reaction to said idiocy. I share this story because there is a truly important life lesson here. When you get married, you are not merely marrying an individual with whom you might share great short-term chemistry. You are marrying their values, their beliefs, their mindset, and that of their family. If any of these additional layers show fissures of incompatibility, run away. Quickly, I faced another dating disaster around the same time. I was introduced to a beautiful Syrian woman through a childhood acquaintance. Her parents were very keen on the match because on paper I was an ideal candidate. Her dad was also a professor. I met with the parents alone, old school, at a Lebanese sweet store. As we were leaving, the mother turned to me and said in Arabic, "You know, our daughter, she has not been opened up by a man," a euphemism for being a virgin. While I am also from the Middle East, this struck me as rather vulgar. I did not think that one should discuss such deeply personal facts in public, a clear proof that acculturation matters, and that you might want to ensure that your family, and that of your prospective mate, exhibit cultural homophily. In any case, I responded awkwardly, "Thanks for letting me know," or something to that effect, and they gave me their blessing to go out with their daughter. My subsequent failed interaction with the daughter perfectly captures the tribalism of the Middle East. The family in question were Syrian Christians, and they were desperate to know whether I was a Christian or a Muslim. No other option seemed possible to them. With that in mind, the daughter spent 95% of her time trying to find out my religion without directly asking the question, as this might be considered gauche. I quickly recognized the pattern and decided to take her on a joyride of obfuscation, part of my ethos of viewing life as a playground. Once I had tired of her charade, I looked at her and coldly stated, "I'm your parents' worst nightmare." She asked what I meant by that comment. I called her out on her repeated attempts to find out whether I was Christian or Muslim. And I reiterated, I'm your parents' worst nightmare. At that point she answered with disdain, what? You're Muslim? No, much, much worse. She was utterly confused. She probably did not even imagine that Lebanese Jews and Syrian Jews existed. Once I advised her of my religious heritage, our date was essentially over, and the car ride back to her home. She leaned against the passenger door in order to maintain maximal distance from the Jew. Once we arrived at her apartment building, she almost jumped out of the moving car and furtively uttered, "Good luck to you." To which I answered, "You mean with my disease. Say hello to your parents. I miss them again." I share this story because it highlights the familial context in which mate choices are made. You are marrying not merely an individual, but their values and those of their parents. If these do not match yours, the likelihood of a happy, long-lasting union is negligible. Love does not conquer all trials and tribulations. Some obstacles cannot be overcome. The ubiquity of the matching process. Many decisions that we make in life involve a matching process. For example, you might have heard that dog owners choose dogs that look like them. But there is a matching process between an individual's morphological features and those of his dog. Science has indeed documented this phenomenon cross-culturally in the United States, Venezuela, and Japan. Of note, there is also a matching process between an owner's personality and that of his dog, a link that was found using samples from Hungary and Austria. Anecdotally, I could have vouched for these findings from personal experience. Belgian Shepherds are regal, majestic, aristocratic, beautiful, athletic, and courageous. Is it any surprise that we own Belgian Shepherds? Another form of canine matching takes place at conformation shows, wherein judges choose a specific dog as the best in show. Perhaps the most famous conformation show in the world is the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show, which has been held since 1877. The key question is establishing what is meant by best. It seems rather awkward to compare an English Mastiff that can weigh up to 230 pounds to a Pomeranian that can weigh up to 7 pounds. The height, weight, and other morphological features of these two dogs could not be any more different, and yet judges arrive to a final rating as to which of the two is best. How is this possible? They do so by a matching process. Specifically, they compare each dog against the standards of its breed, and the one that comes closest in matching these is chosen as the winner. Dog shows are a matching process, and so is much else. For example, the matching process is also applied when consumers choose between a wide assortment of products. Self-congruity theory posits that consumers prefer products that best match important elements of their personhoods, be it their personalities or their values. Car purchases, for instance, can be matched, in the aggregate, to certain demographic groups which show a preference for certain types of cars, as well as matched to people's faces. When individuals, salesmen, recommend a product, they do so using a matching process, which can include a customer's physical appearance. Heavy or thin, round or angular, the matching process takes place in countless other important settings. High school counselors suggest student career paths on the basis of student academic and personality profiles. A similar matching process takes place when prospective employers administer personality tests to job applicants. The objective is to identify the optimal match between a company's culture and an individual's personality. JP Morgan Chase Company has a very different organizational culture than Google, even though both organizations are supremely woke. And the same individual, doing similar work, might flourish in the former and flounder in the latter, based on personality. This is precisely why I do not recommend that people choose their professions in response to market conditions. That is not a good prescription for long-term happiness. The proper fit is between you and your chosen profession, not between you and hot job opportunities. Choosing the job that is the best for you will increase your chances for long-term happiness. Choosing a job that is in demand, but is a bad fit, makes it much more likely that you will experience an existential midlife crisis. Birds of a feather flock together. In popular culture, we often hear two opposing truisms when it comes to mate choice. Birds of a feather flock together and opposites attract, which is the veridical one when it comes to predicting a couple's long-term success. Generally speaking, people who share similar values are much more likely to have successful long-term unions. It is important to note, though, that there are many variables on which people might assort, not all of which are equally likely to augment a couple's future happiness together. Incidentally, the one factor on which people choose people who are dissimilar to them is sampled via our noses and our sense of smell. On one of my recent appearances on Joe Rogan's podcast, I offered a theory regarding the likely trajectory of a marriage success or failure. I first explained that people assort with one another based on their overall mating value. Let us suppose that there are 10 key attributes on which men and women are evaluated. Once the entire basket of attributes is summed up for an individual, this yields an overall mate desirability score on a 0 to 100 scale, least desirable to most desirable. People will sort along their overall mating value scores, such that a woman who scores a 90 is unlikely to choose a mate who scores a 45, or vice versa. People choose others that are of roughly equal overall mate value. Next, I expanded this idea using a longitudinal lens. If two people get married straight out of high school, they might have had, at that point, equal mate values. For example, he is the star quarterback and she is the beautiful valedictorian. It is befitting that the king and queen of prom night would end up together. Now, fast forward 10 years. The former high school football player reached his apex when he was 18. He has been on a steady downhill trajectory since. He works at a menial job, makes very little money, and shows little ambition or drive. On the other hand, his wife has completed medical school and is now starting a neurosurgery residency. I posited on Joe's show that this divergence in their longitudinal mating value would cause nearly insurmountable stressors on their marriage. Put formally, if a couple's mating value diverges beyond a certain level, the marriage is unlikely to survive. Hence, when seeking a life partner, it is worth bearing in mind whether you might be marrying up, or down, or sideways. It is advisable to marry someone of equal overall mate value and in which directions you and your potential mate might go in the future in terms of your respective mate values. While it is not easy to predict your life trajectories, you should at least be aware of the stresses they could put on your marriage. If your potential partner is always growing, personally and professionally, it might be a good idea if you match his or her journey in your own way, rather than wallowing in an apathetic, self-contented status quo. Of a special note, if the divergence in mate value is such that the woman's mate value is longitudinally increasing, whilst that of her male partner is decreasing, this puts additional strain on a marriage, as a man's testosterone levels will fall if he has endemic lower status than his wife. How I met my wife. I met my wife nearly 23 years ago through the magic of life's serendipity. I was at the gym doing some weight training when an individual greeted me with a, "Hey, professor." Another gentleman within earshot asked if I was truly a professor, and if so, in what field. He told me that he was the founder and CEO of a direct marketing firm, and was looking for business-related and house education for his executives. He asked if I would develop a 6-week course covering topics like advertising, decision-making, consumer behavior, and so on. We came to an agreement, and shortly thereafter I arrived at his company's headquarters. A beautiful woman with a radiant smile met me at the elevator and asked if I was Professor Sad, and then she led me to the room where my seminars would be held. The second or third week of the course, I was stricken with a nasty bout of bronchitis. During a break, the woman who had greeted me at the elevator, and who was one of my students, brought me a cup of hot tea. Now, I thought she was not only beautiful, but caring and considerate. She also was eager to continue discussing my lecture topics outside the classroom. I later found out that she was more interested in the professor than the taught material. Shortly after the course was over, we went to see a movie together, The Insider, starring Al Pacino, accompanied by one of her friends. My dad had experienced a recent health scare, and so I had acquired a pager. Younger listeners might have to look that up, so that I could be reached in case of an emergency. My future wife and I also used the pager. We had agreed on the meaning of a set of paged codes so that we could communicate with each other when we were separated and not near a phone. One of these codes was 222, meaning, "I'm thinking of you." Well, as I left her that evening and had hardly walked 100 yards, my pager rang with 222. That experience, coupled with her showing up a few days later at my university office with a picnic basket of Epicurean goodies, sealed the deal for me. One of my all-time favorite movies is the 1993 film A Bronx Tale, starring Chaz Palminteri and Robert De Niro. Unlike other classic movies where De Niro portrayed a mobster, like in The Godfather Part 2, Once Upon a Time in America, and Goodfellas, in this movie, he assumed the role of a hard-working bus driver. Lorenzo, seeking to keep his young son, Calogero, nicknamed C, away from the neighborhood mobsters. Palminteri's character, Sonny, the neighborhood's mafia boss, befriends C to the father's dismay and takes him under his wing. Sonny serves as a mentor to the young man, dispensing a broad range of wisdom, answering such questions as, is it better to be loved or feared? But of relevance to the current context, the mobster turns into a relationship expert when the young man tells him of a looming date with a beautiful girl. Sonny teaches C about the door test, Namely, he instructs him to open the passenger door for his date and come around the back of the car. If the girl scooches over to the driver's side to unlock the door, then she is a considerate person. If she fails to do so, and the infamous words of Sonny, "Listen to me, kid," if she doesn't reach over and lift up that button for you so you could get in, that means she is a selfish broad and all you've seen is the tip of the iceberg. You dump her, and you dump her fast. The positive lesson from the door test is precisely what I gleaned from my future wife when she brought me the tea to soothe my cough. Considerate and kind. Many marriages fail because couples did not heed problematic signals early on, like the door test, among many other cues. Oftentimes, individuals succumb to the exhilaration of their early lust, thinking that this will suffice in building a successful long-term union. But lust will only get you so far. A long-term romantic union has three distinct emotional phases: lust, attraction, and attachment, each of which is associated with a set of endocrinological and neural responses. One needs to navigate all three phases successfully to ensure the long-term viability of a marriage. Seek a spouse who can be your best friend. On most weekday mornings, my wife and I see the kids off to school, and then we head off for a 65-minute round-trip walk to one of our local cafes. Beyond the obvious health benefits of starting off the day with a long walk, doing so outdoors, rather than on a treadmill, engenders what Andrew Huberman, Associate Professor of Neurobiology and Ophthalmology at Stanford University and popular podcaster, refers to as optic flow. Huberman explains this phenomenon as follows. When you look at a horizon or at a broad vista, you don't look at one thing for very long. If you keep your head still, you can dilate your gaze so you can see far into the periphery, above, below, and to the sides of you. That mode of vision releases a mechanism in the brainstem involved in vigilance and arousal. We can actually turn off the stress response by changing the way that we are viewing our environment, regardless of what's in that environment. In other words, a long walk triggers the visual system in a manner that yields a reduction of stress. Our long walk also allows us to have leisurely, meaningful conversations. On one recent walk, we met the father of one of our daughter's friends. He looked at us and said, "How do you do it?" I replied, "Do what?" He explained that he always sees us walking in the neighborhood hand in hand, smiling, blissfully chatting with one another, and he wondered how we are able to maintain such happiness. My answer was simple. My wife and I love to be around one another. We trust one another. We laugh together. We play together. She is my wife, but also my best friend. We have our respective friends, of course, but I have no need for man cave evenings, and she does not require girls' nights out. Our union, in short, is all-encompassing. As political scientist Charles Murray of the Bell Curve fame once said on my show, the happiest marriages occur when you marry someone who is your very best friend to whom you are also sexually attracted. That is indeed a good recipe for a happy marriage. Love is humble. I know a couple who were married in 1950, were together for well over 60 years, and then finally separated late in their lives. Throughout their long marriage, there was an underlying tension because both suffered from pathological pride. In English, the word pride does not differentiate between its positive connotations, "I'm proud of my accomplishments," and its negative counterpart, the primary deadly sin of excessive self-love. In French, though, that distinction exists. Here it refers to the positive connotation, whereas orgueil refers to its negative counterpart. If you are too proud, you never admit to your mistakes. You never apologize for your mistakes. Hence, imagine a marriage wherein one partner does something wrong and should correct it by admitting it and apologizing for it. The mistake need not be something as consequential as infidelity. Even a curt and impatient reply might necessitate an apology. But now, let us assume that both parties have gone on record, stating that they have never made a mistake. Well, this places them in a difficult spot. The reality is that we all make mistakes, but if we are so prideful as to presume that we are perfect and mistake-free, we can never resolve our conflicts. The dynamics in such a marriage become an avalanche of unresolved negativity and unaddressed violations, none of which have ever been resolved positively. In Corinthians chapter 13 verse 4, one finds the following: love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. That is an excellent definition of love. And the old adage is true. If you want a happy marriage, you should never go to bed angry at one another. Imagine, though, if you have never apologized for any transgression, because you are too prideful. Every night becomes another tally in the going to bed angry column. Do this for years, and you will eventually separate. But if you approach your marriage with humility, if you recognize that we all make mistakes, if you immediately apologize for your mistakes, you have established the basis for forgiveness, honesty, and integrity in your marriage. It is important to note, though, that the science tells us that when apologizing for a mistake, the apology must be sincere, contrite, and at times it must serve as a costly signal. That is, in order for a signal, a communication, to be construed as honest, it sometimes must be costly. This is how the recipient knows that it is not the work of a schemer or a scammer. The 2006 film, The Last Kiss, starring Zach Braff and Jacinda Barrett, highlights this important lesson. They are a young couple in love and expecting their first child. Their idyllic romance is shattered by a moment of weakness when Zach's character, Michael, has a sexual liaison with another woman, played by Rachel Bilson. With great remorse, he eventually admits his infidelity to his wife-to-be, who is unwilling to forgive him. An exchange between Michael and his fiancée's father, Stephen, played by Tom Wilkinson, highlights the importance of an apology serving as a costly signal. Michael, I'm in love with your daughter, Stephen. Maybe that doesn't mean anything to you, but I'm standing here. You are her father. I am looking you in the eyes and I'm telling you, I will do anything in the world to get your daughter back. Stephen, anything. Michael, I'll do anything. Stephen, people say that. They don't mean it. Michael, oh, I mean it, Stephen. Well, it's very simple. Just do whatever it takes. Michael, it's that simple. Stephen, yes. You can't fail if you don't give up. True to his word, Michael plants himself outside the entrance to their home for a few days and nights, not eating, drinking, or shielding himself from the weather. At first, his unforgiving fiancée ignores the remorseful and diminished Michael, but slowly she relents. Finally, she opens the front door and invites him in. His willingness to suffer was a costly signal of his commitment to her. He realized he had made a terrible mistake, but through his contriteness and humility, he was able to win back the woman he really loved. Love is humble. Always apologize to your spouse when you have genuinely erred. You need to get this right, because having a great relationship with your spouse is one of the two most important secrets to being happy. The other is finding purpose and meaning in your work, your career. To which I turn next. Find the right job. In 2007, I authored a paper in a medical journal on an evolutionarily relevant variable that might explain male-to-female suicide rates around the globe. Globally, men are 3 times more likely than women to commit suicide, even though women are more likely to make an unsuccessful attempt. Perhaps because with women it is often meant as a call for help. Beyond suicides, men are much more likely than women to be the victims of a murder, to be incarcerated, and to be homeless. One wonders why the patriarchy has yet to resolve those disparities in men's favor. I am sure that the Wellesley College Women's Studies Department is assiduously working on explaining how these epidemiological facts make women the primary WWW. It is interesting, too, that male-to-female suicide ratios can differ sharply between countries. What explains the difference? I argued and found that a country's economic conditions serve as a strong predictor of suicide ratios between men and women. Specifically, the lower a country's average per capita gross national income, the more pronounced the male-to-female suicide ratio. While poor economic conditions affect both sexes, there is a pronounced strain that attacks a man's psyche if he is unable to achieve a desired level of economic prosperity. For example, the link between unemployment and suicide has been documented in several studies and is much more pronounced in men than in women. Moreover, a 1% increase in the unemployment rate has 5 times the negative effect on well-being as a 1% increase of the inflation rate. While many economic variables matter, when it comes to happiness, employment is much more important than purchasing power. Having a job provides people with some measure of purpose and meaning. Of course, not all jobs are created equal in their capacity to garner happiness or misery. Prior to exploring some of the relevant job characteristics, a quick comment about forced retirement, a type of induced unemployment. At many universities, full-time faculty members face a mandatory retirement age, often at age 65. In some instances, this might make sense in that you often have professors who become deadwood after obtaining tenure. While there are several important reasons for tenure, it can engender a slacker mentality among some members of the professoriate. That said, many professors have remained extraordinarily productive well into their golden years. Take, for example, my former doctoral supervisor, the cognitive psychologist J. Edward Rousseau. He is currently in his late 70s, and his productivity remains exemplary. He continues to be a very active researcher, despite the fact that he has no extrinsic reasons for retaining his high productivity standards. I recently attended his retirement party at Cornell. He is simply a scientist at heart. Donald Trump stepped down as president when he was 74. Bernie Sanders ran for president when he was in his late 72nd. These are hardly spring chickens, and yet we do not place them, or even the current and cognitively impaired president of the United States, Joe Biden, under forced retirement. Why should individuals who might have access to the nuclear codes be allowed to assume arguably the most stressful job in the world? And yet innumerable productive and experienced people are put out to pasture at an earlier age. Whether you enter the retirement stage in your life voluntarily or mandatorily, it is crucial that you find ways to retain purpose and meaning in your life. Several studies have documented the physical and mental health benefits that stem from delaying retirement, having bridge employment, engaging in paid work after retiring from one's main career, or doing volunteer work after retirement. I have often heard anecdotal evidence that someone's parent was hit with a coup de vie, a hit of old age, shortly upon retiring. And as a social scientist, I can confirm that there is compelling research demonstrating that refraining from retirement serves as a protective measure against cognitive decline. Notwithstanding the problematic case of Joe Biden, temporal freedom, job control, and justice at work, many lay people wrongly presume that a professor's main responsibility is to teach, whereas the reality is that this constitutes a small, albeit important, part of the job. Between my research, teaching, and administrative duties, coupled with my external professional activities, such as media appearances and consulting, it is typical for me to work very long hours. That said, I'm seldom stressed by the amount of work that I face. Rather, my greatest occupational stressor is when my week includes multiple meetings. Meetings constitute an infringement on my temporal freedom, and as such, serve as a form of scheduling asphyxia. The pursuit of truth and freedom are the guiding values in my life. I may end up working for 14 hours on a portion of a book or an academic paper, but so long as I have personal agency to decide what I am working on, and for how long. Contrast this with the reality faced by some employees who possess little to no freedom in terms of their tasks or their schedule. At work, a person's sense of happiness, satisfaction, and meaningfulness can be tied both to personal autonomy and to the variety of tasks and skills required by a job. Early in my professorial career, parents or siblings would often scoff when I said I was heading off to work. Oh, right, off to work at the cafe again. It was difficult for them to conceive that someone might use a public space, such as a coffee shop, to sit down and read academic studies, work on a scientific paper, draft a book, or prepare a lecture. For them, work had to be defined by an identifiable physical space, like a retail store, a physician's office, or a manufacturing plant. My life was apparently that of a café flaneur, skipping through life with a happy gait of insouciance. If you can be a café vagabond as an integral part of your job, take it. Speaking of cafés, I recently ran into a lovely Tunisian man whom I had originally met whilst watching the unfolding of the 2018 Men's Soccer World Cup at the neighborhood's Italian coffee shop. He was excited to share the good news with me that his partner, who was with him, was pregnant. After congratulating them both, I turned to the woman and asked her if she was planning to eventually return to work, and in the process, I inquired about her profession. Upon hearing that she was a flight attendant, I blurted, "I don't know how you do it." I assumed she might think I was referring to a fear of flying, so I quickly added that I simply could not understand how someone could enjoy being so physically and temporally constrained once those airplane doors were locked. Your fate is sealed for the duration of the flight. I could never do that, nor could I imagine enjoying the restrictions placed on a sailor in a submarine. Personally, I need freedom to schedule myself and to involve myself in a variety of activities. It turns out, according to social science, that my own preferences are a formula for happiness and good health. Studies show definite negative health consequences to those who hold jobs that offer them low intellectual discretion, a measure of how repetitive a job is, and little freedom of schedule, such as the ability to take a break at one's discretion. Those holding such jobs are at significantly higher risk for coronary heart disease. A more recent meta-analysis revealed that the risks go beyond coronary heart disease to include significantly higher rates of all-cause mortality for workers with low job control. Lack of occupational freedom kills. The social epidemiologist, Sir Michael Marmot, has been a leading researcher at the intersection of how our health is affected by the types of jobs that we hold. Generally speaking, jobs can affect our health via several proximate pathways, including our blood pressure, cortisol levels, and inflammation markers. Not surprisingly, job strain has a profound effect on our health. Not only do jobs affect our well-being, but our psychological well-being has a positive effect on our job performance. From an organizational perspective, happy and optimistic employees perform well on the job, as was shown by a data set comprised of more than 900 soldiers. Those who receive performance or heroism awards, 12.6% of the sample size, scored higher on well-being measures as well as on optimism. Jobs affect individuals' well-being, and their well-being affects their job performance. Another key contributor to employees' job satisfaction is whether they perceive their workplaces as just environments. Are employees treated fairly? Are their accomplishments properly valued and appreciated by their bosses, and more generally by their companies? I'll share a few examples from my own career. Back in 1998, I had been invited to speak at the business school of another local university. During my visit, I held a chat with the then chair of the department, who was exploring the possibility of making me a job offer. When I asked him about the likely salary that I might be offered, he took out a salary grid and inquired about the number of years it had been since I obtained my master's degree. This posed a problem since I have both MBA and MS degrees, and I thought it rather strange that he didn't ask about my doctorate. I asked why this mattered, and he said that it was the metric they used to set salaries. So, I asked him, would my salary be the same if, after my master's degree, I had been flipping burgers as a short-order cook, or won the Nobel Prize? He paused and answered, yes. I knew then, I had other reasons too, that this was not the place for me, as its ethos was antithetical to a meritocratic system. My own university is hardly different. First, it is in Quebec, and Quebec is a haven of socialist thinking and aggressive mediocrity, because meritocracy is undoubtedly a form of white supremacy. The key purpose of the faculty's union is to ensure equity across its members. Hence, if you are an overachiever, this places great strain on the ethos of equal non-productivity. Hey, overachiever, stop showing off your accolades. You are making the rest of your colleagues look bad. Several years ago, our then department chair encouraged faculty members to send their recent relevant achievements so that they could be announced publicly. True to the request, I sent along such a list, but the chair announced only a small fraction of it. When I inquired why, the chair said the list in its entirety would have made others feel bad. This non-meritocratic ethos is pervasive in academia, and I have often been its target. In late January 2022, I was humbled and honored to receive a personal letter from the Prime Minister of India, the Honorable Narendra Modi, commending me on my work as part of the celebration of Republic Day. I asked the relevant senior administrators and communications officers at my university if they would like to announce this wonderful accolade. No such announcement has taken place. I should also add that the international success of the parasitic mind has gone largely unnoticed by the university. Universities are a lot more interested in what I call stories of first. Congratulations to the first transgender indigenous Muslima who self-identifies as disabled, but is not, for being valedictorian of the Intersectional Feminism Bachelor's Program. Or, kudos to the first non-binary, transracial Latinx for having being interviewed by a local magazine on the need to dismantle the heteronormative, patriarchal economic system known as capitalism. Sorry, Dr. Sad, your accomplishments are not worthy of further promotion. Hence, I exist in two realms. In one, the world at large, there is appreciation of my work, both as an academic and as a public intellectual. In the other, my own place of employment, I am practically an invisible man when it comes to recognition of my accomplishments. This lack of justice at work has been shown to be detrimental to one's heart health. I can only hope that my genes, good eating habits, exercise routine, and the fact that I have never smoked a cigarette protect me from the occupational injustices that I face. Both my personal advice and the data from social science should encourage you to try to find a job where your talents and contributions are fully appreciated. Life is too short to be willfully ignored by those who should bask in your reflected glory. Finding purpose and meaning through the creative process. There are endless ways that an individual can contribute to improving and enriching the world. From a small gesture of kindness to a grand act of philanthropy. From a very early age, I taught my children the old adage that they should leave a place better than they found it. My children were first inculcated with this ethos at the beach where we would scour the sand picking up bags of litter. Once we had amassed some psychologically satisfying number of objects, we would return to our beach play in the knowledge that we had improved this small swath of public space. It captures the think locally mindset when it comes to finding purpose and meaning and satisfaction in one's daily life. Within the time and space constraints of a particular day at the beach, we manage to make a small difference for the greater good. But what of a grander pursuit of meaning and purpose? Could people find such an elusive goal via their chosen jobs or professions? Are there particular occupations that are more amenable to finding such existential bliss? Of course, some professions, by their very nature, can impart huge impact. Think of the physician who saves you from a dreadful disease, the religious leader to whom one turns for advice, or the teacher who educates your young children, not, one hopes, in the faux allure of critical race theory. Practiced properly, these professions are inherently noble, and accordingly, they can offer purpose and meaning to their practitioners. Notwithstanding such occupational callings, it is my contention that the most effective way to live an enriched professional life is via the magic of the creative process. Take, for example, a chef who practices the culinary arts. The term is apt in that a chef is creating a gustatory tapestry that will enrich your life, even if only for a fleeting moment. The same could be said of the painter, who uses a combination of colors to create a visual tapestry that enriches your visual cortex, or the architect, who uses a combination of scientific principles and aesthetic acumen to create structures that enrich our lives every day. The romantic allure of many European cities stems in part from their architectural beauty. In my case, the need to create is a visceral need, not unlike thirst or hunger. I create new scientific knowledge via the peer-reviewed academic articles and books that I publish. I create new bridges between academia and the general public via my engagement on social media and my media appearances. I create publicly consumable content via my YouTube channel and podcasts. I author articles for the general public via my Psychology Today column and popular books like this one and The Parasitic Mind. Many of my waking hours are spent creating. This gives me great psychological satisfaction. I could never be fully happy and content had I not chosen a profession that allows me to be creative. There are two ways to leave a legacy. One is through genetic propagation, begetting children and investing in one's kin, such as nieces and nephews, and the other is through mimetic proliferation. Genetic propagation is known as inclusive fitness in evolutionary biology. Using the currency of evolutionary theory, an individual who has had 10 children has greater reproductive fitness than a celibate monk who forsakes the joys and challenges of having children. There is a second, non-genetic way by which each of us can achieve a semblance of immortality. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, zoologist Richard Dawkins argued that a meme is the cultural equivalent of the gene. Memes refer to packets of information, ideas, beliefs, fads, jingles that can spread from one brain to another in a process akin to genetic propagation. Viewed from this perspective, a library is a gigantic repository of memes that are stored and cataloged in individual books. As such, when we read a great Shakespearean play, the playwright may be dead, but his words, ideas, and creative imagination live on, to be consumed by millions of people around the world. Shakespeare has achieved mimetic immortality through the creation of his many plays that poignantly capture key features of the human condition. Through my creative output, the online content that I have created, the students that I have taught, the papers and books that I have written, I have secured my mimetic legacy. I strongly suggest that you seek a profession that allows you to be creative, and that grants you the opportunity to attain mimetic immortality, realizing that creativity can be expressed in innumerable ways. It is an assured path to finding meaning and purpose in one's daily activities. What if an individual does not possess any creative talents that might be channeled into a fulfilling career outlet? One can still contribute to creative pursuits via a broad assortment of supporting roles. You may not have the creative genius of filmmaker Steven Spielberg, or the creative writing abilities of Ernest Hemingway. But if the film or publishing industries are alluring, you might consider a career as a talent agent or acquisitions editor. I don't mean to imply that other career paths outside of the creative realm are unimportant or uninteresting. Clearly, accountants, business managers, and insurance adjusters serve vital roles in our economy. But I'm unsure that such jobs offer existential purpose and meaning to those who hold them. Perhaps these people can find their creative outlet via hobbies or volunteer work outside of their normal careers. But it is an advantage if you can find a profession that allows you to instantiate the work as play motto rather than the work to live adage. Whenever creativity is involved, work becomes an act of play, and that makes it much more amenable to the pursuit of happiness. Business owners, too, can create, not only by creating a new business and new jobs, but by creating dual-purpose spaces. For example, my wife once celebrated my birthday by booking us for a special evening at the back of a cookbook store. One of the owners, who was a chef, held short cooking tutorials in a beautiful industrial-grade kitchen in the back of the bookstore. The paid guests learned how to make 4 broths and then got a chance to sample the finished products. Similar spaces exist for workshops on glassblowing, ceramics, painting, and knitting, among other creative activities. The owners of such spaces, whether they are creative themselves in these specific arts and crafts or not, offer a conduit for such creative endeavors. Small business entrepreneurs can find additional purpose and meaning in owning and operating retail artisanal spaces precisely because the commercial interaction there is not purely transactional. Many people who are lucky enough to land jobs or professions that provide them with purpose and meaning end up succumbing to workaholism. They are unable to strike the right balance between their passion for work and other important pursuits in life. This serves as a segue to perhaps the most universal of all prescriptions for the good life, namely, that all good things should be pursued in moderation. The topic of the next chapter,